Hello guys, so in this video today we are going to discuss some of the important Spring Boot annotations and we are going to learn what Spring Boot annotations are. And if you have ever worked on any Spring Boot project, then you might have used most of these annotations. If not all, then most of these you might have used in your project. And if you have not made any project on a Spring Boot, then I would suggest you to make a simple CRUD application based on Spring Boot. So let's start. Let's see the most important top 30 used Spring annotations in this video. So first of all, let's see what are Spring Boot annotations. So they are basically a type of metadata that provides data about a program. So we have a program in which we use these annotations, and to provide the metadata about that particular data of the program, we use Spring Boot annotations. We can say that simply we are using the inbuilt libraries so that to reduce the number of lines of code which we need to write to implement a particular task. Okay, so the annotation in Spring Boot is not a part of program itself and do not have any direct effect on the annotated code's operation. So it do not make any direct impact on the code's operation, but it is useful to import the libraries which can be used to access data and to manipulate data. And Spring Boot annotations do not use XML configuration. Before annotations were, we can say, invented, what we were doing, like all the properties, all the settings were set in the XML configuration file. But Spring Boot annotations do not use XML configuration. Instead, they use the convention over configuration. They just use a convention of we just need to name about a particular annotation before our field or method, and we can use all this configuration with that annotation itself. So let's see. So in this section of learning the Spring Boot series, we will discuss different types of annotations with their examples. So in this section we have included what are Spring Boot annotations, as we have discussed before itself. Let's see, next part will be regarding core Spring framework annotations. So these are top 30 most used annotations. Now Spring framework stereotype annotations, after that Spring Boot annotations, after that we are going to see Spring MVC and REST annotations. So I hope you might be knowing what is MVC. So let me clear with you all that it is a framework that is used to develop web applications using Java, and MVC stands for model, view and controller. It is the basically MVC pattern, and it have all the basic features of a Spring, like inversion of control, dependency injection, etc. After that, you also need to understand what is REST. So RESTful API, basically it is a type of architectural style for an API that use HTTP. It uses HTTP request to access and use the data. So we can say it is simply an architectural style which is used to access data, and it has its own features. We will discuss this in another video, but in this video we are focusing on the important annotations. So these are all 30 annotations which we are going to discuss. So let's see about Spring Boot annotations in detail. The support for annotations in Java is provided since Java 5. And presently I think Java 21 is under built. So this version will be the next upcoming version of Java, and we are talking about Java 5. So annotations are a part of Java since Java 5, and leading Java frameworks quickly adopt the annotations concept. Spring Boot has provided a support for the annotations since the release of Spring 2.5. So we need to at least remember from which version we can use these annotations, which version of Spring, and after which version of Java we can use annotations, because if you are using Spring version lesser than 2.5, then annotations will not be supported by that Spring application. So you need to know about these basics as well. Now, due to their extensive structure and internal concepts, the annotations provide a lot of context in their declaration. A lot of context is there in the declaration. Now, before the annotations, the Spring Boot project's behavior was controlled and managed by XML configurations, as I've already discussed in the starting of this video, that before the invention of this Spring Boot annotations, or we can say simply annotations, the project behavior was controlled and managed by the configuration file, which is based on XML. Now the annotations provide us several capabilities to manage and configure the behavior of the Spring framework. We can manage and configure the behavior of a Spring framework, how it should behave, by using annotations. Now the annotations in a Spring Boot takes place in org.springframework.boot.autoconfigure and autoconfigure.condition packages. These are two packages in which annotations in a Spring Boot takes place. Now let's discuss some frequently used Spring Boot annotations with examples. So first one is at required. At required annotation is applied on the setter method of a bean file. So if we are using any bean file, so on the setter method, we can apply this required annotation. Use of this annotation indicates that annotated bean must be populated at configuration time with the required property. So this required property will be set at the configuration time in this annotated bean. Otherwise, it will throw a bean initialization exception. So basically, we can say that required annotation is applied on a setter method of a bean, so that the bean initialization exception can be prevented, and it can be configured at the time of declaration itself. Consider the below example. Let's see and understand with the help of an example. So package is there, com java sterling sb dot spring boot demo, and inside this we are importing org.springframework.beans factory annotation required. So we can see that inside this org.spring framework we have beans, and inside this beans we have factory, and inside this factory we have annotation, and inside this annotation we have required. That was basically required in this program as well. So public class employee, we have made a class named employee, and then in this body we have declared a private integer variable id and public integer get id, so that it can be used. Why we have made it public and why we have made this as private? We need to know that these are access specifier. We need to maintain the object-oriented programming principles. So we have made this public so that it can be used anywhere in the program. We can access this ID using this getID method anywhere in the program. And this @required, which is the main part of this program to be understood at this point of time, is that we have made an annotation above this setID method, and we have set this ID to this method, so that initialization can be done, and this exception, bean initialization exception, would not be thrown. Okay. Now next is auto wired. It is also most important annotation which needs to be understood. So auto wired annotation is applied on fields, instance variables, setter methods, and constructors. Basically, what does it do? It basically creates the object of another class in that class, so another class, so that it can be used or accessed in that class, right? So we have class A and we have class B. So if we want to create an object of class B in class A, then we can auto wire this class, and we can use that object in this class A itself. Okay, so it provides auto wiring to bean properties. When we apply the auto wire to a field, the Spring contain will automatically assign the fields with assigned values. We can also use this annotation on private fields. Okay, so it is not limited that we can apply this annotation to only public or protected or private fields. It can be used with or it can be used on in private fields as well. Now consider the below code. Let's see the code. Package com.javasterling.sb java Spring Boot demo. This is the package, and then we have imported using this org Spring framework, beans factory annotation, and auto-wired. So auto-wired is also mentioned or declared inside this annotation package of this particular org framework, Spring framework. So we have made this class, and we have auto-wired this private person p. So there is a class person, and we have annotated this with auto-wired in another class employee. Okay, and we can use this person p in this class itself. So when we use auto-wired on setter methods, Spring will try to perform the by type auto-wiring on the method. It means we are instructing Spring that it should initiate this property using the setter method, where you can add your own custom code, such as initializing any other property with this property. Now consider the below code. This is the package Java Sterling. Okay, similar package is there. Then we have imported using this org Spring framework package. After that, we have declared this class and private person, and then we have auto-wired this set person, and like this. Okay. Now next is configuration annotation. Now @configuration annotation is used on classes which defines bean as the source of the bean file. So configuration annotation is used on classes which defines bean as the source of bean file, and it is an analog for the XML configuration file. It is configured using Java class. Okay, so basically configuration annotation is used on classes, and the class should be Java class itself, and Java class that is annotated with this annotation is a configuration itself, and will import the methods to instantiate and configure the dependencies, all the dependencies that we are having in this project, in a particular project. So that would be instantiate and configured in this method, or we can say in this class, configuration class. So let's see this with an example. We have used this annotation @configuration above this class employee, and we have auto-wired this set person method. So we can declare that this is a configuration class employee, and all the configuration, let's see, it is also mentioned in this annotation only, an annotation itself, context annotation, right? Now next is component scan. The component scan annotation is used to scan a package for beans. Okay, to scan a package, we have a package. Let's say we have a package com.example.c1. So to scan all the beans inside a particular package, this package, we can use this component scan annotation. It is used with configuration annotation. Okay, so when we are using configuration annotation, we can use component scan annotation as well to scan all the package, to scan a package for beans. Okay, now we can also define the base package for scanning. If we do not specify the base package, it will scan from the package of the class that declares this annotation. Now consider the below example. This is example, and we have declared the component scan annotation in this, and we have mentioned the base packages com.javasterling.sb.springboot demo. You need to scan means we are telling Spring that you need to scan all the beans inside this package Spring Boot demo, and we have also used it with configuration annotation itself. Now let's see what is the bean annotation. This is a bean @bean. Now @bean annotation is an alternative of XML bean tag. So initially, or we can say before annotation, for use of annotation, we were declaring bean tag inside the XML file, and now we can use this bean annotation, and the purpose will be served by this annotation as well. If you ever have gone through the bean tag, you must be familiar with its working. Now it is a method level annotation which tells the method to produce a bean to be managed by the Spring container. Okay, so what we are doing by providing this bean annotation, so first of all, it is a method level annotation, means it can be used on a method and tells the method to produce a bean to be managed by the Spring container. It also works with @configuration annotation to create Spring beans, as the configuration holds the methods to instantiate and configure dependencies. Okay, so it is saying that we can also use bean annotation with the configuration annotation to create Spring beans, and the methods which are annotated with @bean annotation acts as bean ID, and it creates and returns the actual bean. For example, we have declared this @bean above this method declaration bean demo, and we have returned new bean demo. Now next is @qualifier. @qualifier annotation is used along with auto-wired annotation. Okay, it provides some more control over the dependency injection process. So we are more enhancing the control. What we have done with auto-wired, we are increasing the control of the program, or we can say Spring dependency injections, using this qualifier annotation. It can be specified on individual method parameters or constructors arguments. It is useful for reducing the duplicity while creating more bean files of the same type, and we want to use only one of them with a property. Okay, so it is basically used for reducing the duplicity while creating more bean files of the same type. Okay, now let's see with an example. We have created, we are implementing it on a bean interface, and we have created two beans, B1 and B2. So this is a component and it's also component. We have a class B1 implements bean interface and a B2 implements bean interface. So we have seen the class which implements bean interface. Okay, two classes which are implementing the bean interface. So if B1 auto wires the bean interface, it is hard for Spring to decide which one of the given implementation to inject. Now the solution to this problem is that we can use the qualifier annotation. Okay, so what does qualifier annotation do? Basically, when we are declaring the bean interface dependency, then we need to provide this qualifier so that Spring can understand that we need to qualify bean B2 for this dependency injection. Now the Spring will easily decide which bean to auto wire. Okay, now let's see @lazy annotation. So this lazy annotation is used as on component classes. By using this, we can say that Springboot initialize all the auto wire dependencies and configure the project at a startup. By default, it happens. Okay, now this annotation allows us to initialize the project components lazily. Okay, now by using this annotation, lazy annotation, what we can do is we allow it allows us to initialize the project components lazily, which means the bean will be created and initialized when it is requested. Okay, so it is also interesting annotation which is provided by Spring framework. It says that by default what happens is all the auto wire dependencies are configured at the time of startup of the project. But if we want to make beans configure at the time when they were requested or when they were required, so at that time only they will be initialized and they will be created. Okay, so that is the use of lazy annotation. When the lazy annotation is used in a configuration class, it will initialize all the bean methods lazily. Consider the below example. We have used lazy annotation in this, and the configuration and the component scan as well. So this is a class app config. We have created a bean employee ID get employee ID return new employee ID, and here also we have created a bean public cell get cell new cell. We have written this new cell. So by providing this annotation at the top of configuration, or we can say the class, so we make to create the bean lazily. Okay, at the time when they were requested, they will be created at that time itself. Next is @value. @value annotation is used at field, constructor parameter and method parameter level. It indicates a default value for the field or parameter. Actually it's field, not filed, right? It's field. It indicates a default value for the field or parameter to initialize the property with. Its use is quite similar to the auto-wired annotation. What we are doing in auto-wired, it is working similarly. Like it also injects values from the property file into beans attribute. So whenever we are providing the value to a particular object in Java, the Spring Boot application, from application.properties file, we use this value annotation and it is very much useful. It supports both $ and hash placeholders. Okay, now let's start with the Spring Framework stereotype annotations. Now this is a add component. Add component annotation is used at the class level to mark a Java class as a bean. When we mark a class with add component annotation, it will be found during the class path. The Spring Framework will configure the annotated class in the application context as a Spring Bean. So we are using it on a class level first of all. Okay, and we are marking this class as a bean. Okay, by using this component annotation. After that, when we mark this class with annotation component annotation, it will be found during the class path. Okay, so after that, Spring Framework will configure the annotated class in the application context. Now let's see with this example. We have a package Java Sterling and we have a component, we have declared the component annotation above this employee class. So we have made this as a bean, we can say, using this component annotation. Now next is controller annotation. Controller annotation is used at the class level. It is also a class level annotation first of all. After that, it is a specialized version of @component. So we can say it is a specialized version of the component annotation, and it is used to annotate a class as a web request handler, most commonly to serve the web pages. It returns a string having a redirect route. Okay, we can return a string using it having a redirect route. Now generally it is used with the request mapping annotation, so we generally do not prefer to use it alone in the definition. So what we add with this is the request mapping annotation. Okay, request mapping we generally use with the controller annotation. Now next is add service. Add service annotation is also used at a class level to mark a service implementation, including business logic, calculations, call external APIs, etc. Generally it also business logic, so it is also important annotation, we can say, to make Spring identify that this particular class is a service based class in which business logic is implemented, and external calls to APIs is also made in this class itself, and all the business logic of the application is held in this service implementation class. So let's say this is a service annotation we have added to this service demo, and we have made a method service1, and we have a business code inside this. Okay, now let's see another important another important annotation, that is repository annotation. So whenever we are using JPA repository, JPA to interact with the database for persistence related tasks, okay, we use this repository annotation. It is used on Java classes which directly access the database. Okay, this class is used to directly access the database. It acts as a marker for any class that is used as a repository or DAO, that is data access object. Okay, so we are using to mark any class that is used as a repository or DAO. This annotation has a built-in translation feature, means that when the class found an exception, it will automatically handle with that, and there is no need to add a try a catch block manually. Okay, so this is a built-in translation feature in this annotation itself. So this is a class, and we have made it a repository annotation, and we have declared a method public void delete. Simply, this is just an example. You can make any method. You can also frame native query using JPA. Okay, so that is a different thing. When we will discuss about JPA, then we are going to deep dive into this, but as of now we are just focusing on the important annotations. Springboot annotations, the first one is enable auto configuration. So whenever we are working on a Springboot project, so we are having the enable auto configuration. This is the most important annotation as far as the Springboot applications are concerned. Enable auto configuration annotation is used to implicitly defines a base search package. Whenever we want to add a base search package, we add this annotation enable auto configuration inside the main class. Okay, it is usually placed on the main class, right? Main application class. It will automatically configure the projects by adding beans based on the class path settings, beans, and other property settings. The use of this annotation is degraded in Spring Boot 1.2.0 release because there is a great alternative of the annotation Spring Boot application in is available form. Okay, so this annotation's use was degraded in Spring 1.2.0 release because we have another better annotation, that is Springboot annotation. Let's discuss what does it is used for, right? So Springboot application is the combination of three annotations. So we can see that it is doing all the work which was done separately by three annotations before. Which are these three annotations? Enable auto configuration, component scan, and configuration. So a Springboot application annotation is used on the application class while setting up a new Spring Boot project. So whenever now if we are creating at this point of time with the advanced Spring version, when we create a new Spring Boot application, we use a Spring Boot application annotation so that we can set up a new project, and it is used on application level. Okay, and the class that is annotated with this annotation must be placed in the base package. So we generally place this annotation on that class which is already placed in the base package. So the main task of this annotation is to scan the projects. First of all, it scan all the projects and it scans the sub packages only. Okay, it scans only sub packages. For example, if we annotated a class that is available in sub package, then it will not scan the main package. Okay, that is the thing that we need to understand. Next is Spring MVC and REST annotation. Okay, MVC, that is model view controller design pattern. Next is the first of this annotation is controller. Controller annotation can be used with Spring MVC and Web Flux. We will focus on this Spring MVC itself. Don't go into this Web Flux at this point of time. It will create confusion. Okay, let's be limited to Spring MVC at this point of time. And this controller annotation is used with Spring MVC. It is used at the class level as a controller. Okay, so it is used at class level as a controller. Whenever we want to define a class as a controller class, then we need to add this annotation at the top of this class declaration. It is useful for detecting the component classes from the class path and auto register the bean definition. The class annotated with this annotated can handle multiple request mappings. Okay, so the main benefit of using this is that it can handle multiple request mappings. We can have multiple endpoints, and all the mappings can be handled properly using this annotation. Next is request mapping. Request mapping annotation is used to map the web request. It can hold several optional components such as consumes, header, method, name, params, path, value, etc. This annotation can be used with classes as well as methods. हम classes and methods के साथ इसको use कर सकते हैं. Consider the below example: @controller, @request mapping. So we have controller above this class, and we have request mapping like this is we have requested in this request mapping. So we can say that to map the web request, we are using this request mapping annotation. Next is get mapping. So get mapping we are seeing in this. Get mapping annotation is used to map the HTTP GET request on the specific handler method. It is an alternative of request mapping. Method is equal to request method dot get. So we are just manipulating the request mapping using this get mapping, post mapping, put mapping. These are all different methods. Get mapping is used to get request for get request, and post mapping is used for post request onto the specific handler method, whereas put mapping is used for any update specific method and creating a web service endpoint that creates or updates. Okay, so this is used for that. And for delete mapping, we are generally performing the method using HTTP delete request and creating a web service endpoint that deletes a resource. Next is patch mapping. What is this patch mapping? It is used for HTTP patch request, and it is the alternative of request mapping, request method dot patch. Okay. Next is request body. Request body annotation is used to bind the HTTP request with an object in a method parameter. Request body is also important, you need to understand it. Basically used to bind the HTTP request. Whatever request data is coming is used to bind it with an object in the method parameter. Internally, it uses the HTTP message converters to convert the request body, and when a method parameter is annotated with the request body annotation, the Spring framework wraps the incoming HTTP request body to the parameter. Okay, this is the work done by the request body annotation. Now request body, let's see request body. Okay, request body is mentioned here as well. Okay, let's see. Request body annotation is used to bind the method return value to a response body. So whenever we are getting okay, that is request body and this is response body. Don't get confused with this. As the name suggests, this response body will bind the return value of the particular method to the response body. Okay, and then it acknowledges the Spring Boot framework to serialize the return an object into JSON and XML format. Next is path variable annotation. Path variable annotation is used to extract the values from URI. URI is like Uniform Resource Identifier. It is most suitable annotation for building the RESTful web service where the URL contains the path variable. The multiple path variable can be defined in a method. Okay, we can define multiple path variable in a method. Next is request param. Request param annotation, a query parameter is used to extract the query parameter from the URL. Request param is used basically for the extracting the query parameters from the URL. It is most useful for developing the web applications. It can define the default values and if the query parameter is not present in the URL. Next is request header. Request header annotation is used to get the details about the HTTP request headers, and it can be used as a method parameter. The optional elements of this annotation are name, value, required, default value. We must specify a separate annotation for each detail in the header, and it can be used repeatedly in a method. Okay, it can be used like this. Now next is REST controller. REST controller is a combination of controller and a response body annotation in itself, and it itself annotated with a response body annotation. If a REST controller is used, then there is no need for annotating it with a response body. Okay. Next is request attribute. Request attribute annotation is used to wrap a method parameter to the request attribute. Okay, we have a method parameter and we want to wrap it with a request attribute, so we use this request attribute annotation. It gives convenient access to the request attributes from a controller method. Using this annotation, we can access objects that are populated on server side. Now cookie value. Cookie value annotation is used as a method parameter level. Okay, and usually it is used as a request mapping methods argument. The HTTP cookie is bound for a given cookie name to the cookie value parameter. It is used with the method that is annotated with the request mapping. So it is also useful whenever we want to make request mapping methods argument. Means we are using the request mapping methods argument. We can use this cookie value. Basically, HTTP cookie. What is HTTP cookie? It is, we can say, a small method which stores the frequently accessed parameters, okay, or values. So okay, next is cross origin. What is cross origin? Cross origin annotation is used both at the class and method level. Okay, first of all, it can be used at both the class and method level. It is used to enable the cross origin request, and it is useful for the cases if a host serving JavaScript is different from the data serving host. Okay, so we can use in that case cross origin, and in such cases CORS, cross origin resource sharing, enables the cross dominated communication. In order to enable this communication, we just need to add the cross origin annotation. Okay, so if we are reading this and if we understand this, then it is somewhat a complex task, but by using this annotation it is made so easy. Okay, so we can say that annotation has made the life of developers easy. Okay, by writing less number of less number of lines in a particular code, we can perform far more things, okay, using these annotations. Now, default behavior of the annotation allows all the origins, all headers, and the HTTP methods specified in the request mapping annotation, and the max age of 30 minutes. However, we can control and customize the behavior by specifying the corresponding attribute values. Okay, we can customize this as well. We have discussed some most frequently used annotation in Spring Boot, and so that's all in this video. We will continue with another important questions related to Spring Boot in the next videos. Thank you.